With my art, I express my life, my surroundings, the places that I live, the things that I see in my daily life. And art doesn't have to be a grand still life, something that's just so, we say, beautiful. It could be really anything. You could think about your surroundings at any time. Even think about the textures that are around you. I have framed works on papers. There's 3 works on paper in here that are in the small frames. And actually, I've taken graphite rubbings of like cement to kind of tie back into the road, and those are abstractions of the freeway. You can find interesting things and textures and colors all around you at any time. Inspiration is everywhere.
Hi, I'm Melissa Richardson Banks, and welcome to MUSED Houston Live. To the Horizon and MUSED Houston Live are funded in part by the City of Houston through the Houston Arts Alliance. And we're really grateful for their support of artists and conversations that help connect community with their work. So thank you very much. We're here today in this beautiful Sabine Street Studios, surrounded by artwork by artists, and my guest today, Rebecca Pugh, in her exhibition, To the Horizon. Rebecca is a Canadian-born, Houston-based artist who earned her MFA in studio art from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And currently she's an art professor and the director of the Wright Gallery at Texas A&M University. Now, for the past 2 years, she's commuted between Houston and College Station a few times a week. Now, during these solo drives, while keeping her eye on the road, I'm told, she started noticing the changing landscape, from fences and grasses, wildflowers, overpasses, changing light in the horizon. What fascinates me is that she's not documenting the drive itself, and rather over time, the commute itself becomes part of her creative practice and her artistic process. So, Rebecca, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, and I want to thank Melissa from MUSED Houston, and I want to thank Sabine Street Studios and Swiggards for this opportunity.
Absolutely.
And thank you, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate everybody so much.
Oh, and I've loved this. Thank you so much for allowing us to really learn about your practice, to have a conversation with you. Before we talk about you and your work in Texas, I really want to go back to your time in Las Vegas, and that's where you went to grad school. There, you told me that the Mojave Desert first influenced your kind of the building blocks of your paintings, the lines and shapes that you use. And of course, colors change as you transition. And I'm really interested in talking about that. But first, how did living in the Mojave Desert change the way you painted or created from before that time?
Thanks for that question. I'm really thrilled to talk about that experience because making work in the Mojave Desert was very informative for my current work and ultimately my use of abstraction. So being from Canada, I'm from Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada, so northwestern Ontario. I had a wonderful opportunity to do graduate studies at University of Nevada, Las Vegas to do my MFA, where I was able to, create a body of work. And at that time, I was, expanding on my landscape practice. Before then, I was working with landscape when I was living in Canada. But at UNLV, I was able to work at the campus art museum and teach drawing. And those, are things that I still do today in my career. Alongside making my landscape work. But when I was in the Mojave Desert, I really kind of changed my approach to landscape work. So I ultimately started working with abstraction. So when I was in the desert, I really noticed a unique kind of structure that I noticed in the desert. I noticed repetition of line and shape and color, but mostly repetition of line throughout different scales on the landscape. So for example, when I would go on a hike with my friends or classmates, I'd pick up a rock and notice all these beautiful lines of strata. And then I would look maybe, you know, to the side and see like a large rock formation and see the lines repeated in that scale as well. And then I would look out into the vast kind of receding land and see all of these lines. So I was really kind of fascinated with that repetition of line ultimately. And in the desert, especially when you were kind of on the outskirts of the desert, so like outside of Las Vegas, there's not much around. It's very much kind of uninhabited around there. So you see just vast empty landscape. And the space really became quite abstract. It's kind of a unique thing that happens in the Mojave Desert because there's no kind of references like architecture or anything to kind of gauge the space. So all these lines kind of become very abstract. So I like to kind of say that like the Mojave Desert like taught me how to use abstraction. So ever since then, I have been kind of fascinated or looking for the repetition of line, shape, and color in the landscape. So when I moved to Texas in 2020, I noticed lots of interesting forms of repetition in the landscape. So for example, repeating fence posts in ranch fences, or the beautiful array of wildflowers that we have on the sides of the roadways, and freeway ramps in Houston. So just really excited about the different forms of repetition that I see in the Texas landscape.
I love that you also began thinking about landscape, and you mentioned this to me also because of the heat and the light and the vastness when you were in Vegas. It's something to experience from the inside of an interior space, such as an air-conditioned car. And how did that idea become part of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout my MFA, part of it was that, you know, we had to have 2 solo exhibitions, one kind of midway through the program, and then at the end of the exhibit, which is like it was a 2-floor exhibit, and that exhibit, mine was called Parallels. But I had a written component for my thesis in which I really kind of thought about the conceptual kind of reasons why I was creating the work or why I was using certain materials. And I started to really kind of analyze my relationship with the landscape. And I noticed that, especially in the harsh climate of the Mojave Desert, it's very, very hot. Most of my experiences with the landscape were mediated through like indoor spaces and modern conveniences like air conditioning. And at one point, the air conditioning went out in my apartment and it was like unbearably hot. And I was wrapped in like my cotton bed sheets. And I realized like usually these bed sheets, I would put them on for comfort, but you know, like it just was like a different way of thinking, and then I realized I could actually use this as a conceptual material, and I knew that Josef Albers was also using felt in a particular conceptual way. So at that point, I started using more conceptual materials in my work, and I was starting to make freestanding paintings, so landscape paintings that would stand off the wall in the center of the gallery, and I would take the bed linens, and I got them from secondhand stores in like found colors, and I would rip them into strips, and I would staple them onto the painted frame. And I would also paint canvas and rip the canvas. So it was a freestanding painting with a conceptual material. So those are the things that I've been thinking about since then, and kind of continuing since then. My relationship with the landscape is ultimately still mediated by indoor spaces. You know, for example, so especially driving. So I'm ultimately kind of driving through the landscape. I drive twice a week in between Houston and College Station, where I work at Texas A&M University. And you know, when I'm in the car, it's very much, you know, air conditioned. So it's kind of playing off those same kind of fundamentals that I've always been thinking about.
Obviously, it sounds like that Texas landscape really helped you continue that conversation that started at the Mojave Desert. Did it send your work in a new direction, or did it just expand your focus?
Yes, that's a great question. So actually, before I moved to Texas, I lived in 2 other states. I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, right after graduating, and then also Gainesville, Florida. So when I was living in those states, I was making some smaller kind of studies, kind of continuing my work. So I made a lot of works on paper. And then when I moved to Texas in 2020 for my faculty position at Texas A&M, I started, you know, making kind of larger works, really kind of starting this body of work that you see now in the show To the Horizon. So I was really excited to think about my continued relationship with the landscape and my interest in the formal kind of elements of the landscape, so in particular like repetition of line, shape, color, and instead of using a conceptual material like I used to use bed linens, and I forgot to mention I used to use a lot of also plastic shopping bags. So I've worked with mixed media for quite a long time, so of course I wanted to continue with my practice in mixed media. But when I moved to Texas A&M, I realized that, hey, maybe I will just, try to incorporate drawing with my painting, because I am teaching drawing. I've taught drawing since 2012, so it's been quite a long time. So I wanted to kind of combine those two into works. So to start most of the works, my process begins with making a collage or a digital drawing. And then I make the work in my studio. So the work behind me, for example, the first step of making the work itself was making an 18-foot long graphite drawing, which I then cut into shapes and mounted into my paintings.
So obviously Texas is a very different landscape from all of those states, from Mojave Desert, from Florida, from Michigan. And you mentioned this already, but I want to kind of just bring this back to what the work that you've just created or recently, and what struck you again about the what you first began living and working here, and what of that part of Texas really struck you as, what surprised you? Was there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I moved to Texas, it was late March 2020. It was like the first week of the pandemic, when it was, at the height, when it was announced to everybody that, things were going to change. So my husband and I, we drove from Florida to Texas. It was a very unusual drive. The roads were very quiet. But I remember kind of stepping out of the moving truck and being just totally fascinated by this long grass that was just on the boulevard of our apartment. And I was just so blown away by the beauty of the long grass, and I still am. I've got this work behind me of the fallen drought fence, the grass is drawn. I've got a painting titled November Grass, so I'm really fascinated by the beauty in like the natural kind of grass and wildflowers that we have here in Texas.
Well, many people think, including myself having grown up here, that Texas is flat. And we know that, but your paintings and your mixed media work really suggests that it's actually full of rhythm, pattern, depth, and structure. Do you think it's something that perhaps the rest of us overlook? Maybe you really can't address that, but I guess, what do you think about it? That you mentioned the tall grass, but what else struck you about the landscape when you first got here?
Great. So when I first got here, I started looking around me, and I wanted to start using brighter colors. I wanted to really push my color palette, because previously I was working in the Mojave Desert, which is very much like almost like a pastel palette of tints. So I really wanted to push my use of color, use brighter colors, more contrast. I started looking around me, of course. So across from my studio, there's a field with horses. There's like 3 or 4 horses, and they're just so beautiful. So I was fascinated with them. And actually, some of the earliest works that I created in this body work are in this show. So the show is 20 paintings, and 3 of them were created in 2022. Or 2023. One is a field with horses, one is of a barbed wire fence, and then 2 fence posts near the entrance. I started painting abstractions of birds, because I'm an avid bird watcher since I lived in Florida. I started really looking around me in College Station, and College Station, being in an agricultural area, is very beautiful. Like, there's a lot of beauty in the nature. About 2 years ago, my husband and I moved to Houston, and I continue to work at Texas A&M, so I do the drive twice a week, and I'm just really mesmerized by the grass that I see at a high speed when I'm driving.
Oh, yeah. Well, eventually, again, those observations of that particular drive, that routine, if you will, it's probably something that many of us would really complain about, like a long commute. And I, on a personal note, I used to live in Bryan College Station. I did my graduate work at Texas A&M. So I know that drive well, or at least I thought I knew the drive well until you told me the drive, because I always took Highway 290 to Highway 6, which had an obligatory stop at Frazier's, which is this wonderful concrete garden area. If you haven't been to, it's like an art park. It's really amazing. And then you have to really slow down after that because it's where the Waller County speed traps are. But you actually took a different route, which really threw me off because I was not familiar with it. Can you talk a little bit about the route that you took?
Yes, so absolutely. So totally agree. Kind of my choice to view my commute as part of my studio practice to me is like a positive choice. But when I'm driving, and ultimately always, I'm looking for like patterns and textures in my daily life. A very long time ago, I used to use found receipts and the found plastic bags in my work. So I've always kind of looked in my surroundings and really just thinking about my life and my surroundings. So naturally doing the commute, so between College Station and Houston, I take a particular route. I take Texas 249. It's a little more quiet than 290, so it's the toll road, and I find it's just quieter, and there's more greenery. So driving through like Montgomery and Grimes County, I find the wildflowers are like the most stunning. And we have a program in Texas where the Texas Transportation Services has planted wildflower seeds along the roadway. So it's a beautiful thing that we have in Texas.
So at what point when you were doing this drive between, again, College Station, Brian, and Houston, was there a moment that you just said, oh, I'm inspired by this, but it sounds like you were already inspired for other drives. I was just curious if there was one like, oh, wow, there is something here. Did you have an aha moment?
Well, actually, in my earliest work in the show, which is Field with Horses, which was an abstract painting of the horses across my studio, that was the first work that I made where I was going to abstract the grass in the field as graphite lines, so pencil lines. So I had been thinking of making work like that before I had moved to Houston. So then when I started doing the drive to Houston, the movement, just viewing the landscape at a higher speed and for a longer time, and just more repetition of doing the same drive and seeing the same things, and seeing the changes in the wildflowers actually is really interesting. So seeing the wildflowers really kind of sprout in the spring and getting really excited to see the wildflowers. Like sometimes I will see people that have pulled over to take pictures on the side of the road, but in my work, I choose to express my kind of excitement about the wildflowers through like high chroma, so bright colors. So in my painting, April Flowers, in the orange painting, I use bright orange to express kind of, the wildflower, the Indian paintbrush wildflower that we have here, but then moreover, my excitement of seeing the bright, exciting flowers. And I've got a painting in the show over here called Remember Spring, which is the same kind of thing, very bright colors, kind of expressing my excitement of driving and seeing these beautiful wildflowers, but not pulling over to see them, just working from memory and expressing my memory and feelings through my abstract paintings.
One thing that I noticed that a lot of your paintings have this horizontal orientation or feel, not necessarily the canvas, but even the line movement. But that movement feels different because for me, and you were talking about being in the car because you're the driver, but it feels like and maybe that's what you intended, like I'm the passenger of your artwork and you're driving and I'm the passenger and I'm looking out the side window as you're moving through the landscape. So you're actually driving the car and I'm there with you. And I think that's what's really beautiful about being the viewer of your work, in my opinion. And I love that part about that work. So I don't know what you think about that, but I'm the passenger and you're the driver?
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I love being the passenger. When I'm the passenger, say, when my husband's driving, I am, excited to make these small little sketches. And that's actually what I did for this work behind me called Fall and Drought Fence. Once I saw that, we were on a cross-country road trip. So we were going north from Texas to visit our family in Canada. So a very long trip, but kind of like North Texas. It was 2024. It was a year where we had a very bad drought. And I remember just driving past this fallen wooden fence and just sketching it right away. But, on a regular basis, it's just me driving, making the commute between the cities. So I when I see something that's exciting to me, you know, in the colors of the wildflowers, say, I will take a recording on my watch. I'll record ideas for colors, and then when I get to my studio, when I get to it, I work from memory. But that kind of the time between when I see what is inspiring and then when I make the work, that kind of time lapse allows me to really focus on working from memory rather than painting exactly what I saw. So when I work from memory, I also focus on heightening the color. I had talked about, like, you know, how I use bright colors to express my excitement of seeing the wildflowers. So I definitely heighten the colors, and I think about color proportion. So for example, how much orange do I need in a painting of Indian paintbrush wildflowers? And then after that, I start with making a collage, and I'll show you. So here's an example of a collage. So this is the study for the painting Bluebonnet over there in the gallery. So I have quite a few of them here, but I'm usually really excited to make my collage work. So this work is titled 70 miles per hour, and it's over there in the gallery. This is Texas horses that I have over there. But someone asked me the other day, like, you know, with that time lapse, how do you not lose interest, right? But usually I'm just so excited to express what I'm excited about. And I love painting, so I'm just really thrilled to make the work. And also, often I will create my studies digitally. So my students at Texas A&M kind of inspired me of working digitally. You know, when I'm in Houston, it's just another way where I could, you know, make the work, because my studio right now is in College Station. So when I'm in Houston, like I'll work on my studies digitally. So I kind of combine kind of a more analog approach of making my studies through collage with using kind of new technologies like digital drawing. And to make my collage work, I use a particular material. It's called Color Aid paper. So Color Aid is a company that makes screen printed paper. So they're beautiful paper. They're very smooth. But this particular material was used in the teachings of Josef Albers, who is like an iconic artist. He first started kind of teaching at the Bauhaus. He taught at Black Mountain College, then Yale, and he published his pedagogy in a big portfolio in 1963, and it's titled Interaction of Color. And when I started teaching at Texas A&M, they have a very rare copy. So it was published in 1963. They only made about 1,900 of them, and they sold out completely within 5 years. So most people experience Albers' Interaction of Color through the handbook. There's a few different versions of the handbook. But I had a rare opportunity to teach with the original portfolio. So I started using the Color Aid paper in my own practice. And one of the reasons that Albers used Color Aid paper in his teachings is that, you know, students can experiment with color, and they don't have to mix the colors or wait for it to dry. They could just use this ready-made material to quickly experiment with color, because Josef Albers, and the kind of premise behind his teaching is that color is relative, meaning that, you know, there's facts about color, like we know this is red, but when this red is next to a different color, it's always gonna appear slightly differently because color is relative. So that's been a great opportunity to work with the new material in my preliminary work.
You know, we've referenced a bit about this wonderful 18-foot installation piece behind us, the fallen Drought Fence. And you mentioned already that it's been inspired by this fallen fence. But it kind of leads us to an expansion of what you're talking about in terms of actually your process. And you did talk a little bit about that, but I really want to point on the three elements of here, because we've been referencing your work often as paintings here, but they're really mixed media works because they combine collage, drawing, and painting. And especially, one of the things that one of my collectors always says is you gotta see work in person. And so I encourage you, if you're this show is obviously closing today, but it's obviously your work will live on your website, but to see it in person is so important. And we have an audience here today, and hopefully afterwards you can get close and see, just get on the side. I always tell my family when we're out arting, you know, you can always kind of tell who the artist or the collector is, because they're usually at the paintings, not just looking at them full front, they're on the side going, how did they do that? My mom's an artist, and I see her doing that a lot. And so she'll go and talk to the artist, like, what did you use? What medium? How did you do that? What's the process? And I love watching people when I'm out in galleries because of that. So is there something you'd like to kind of talk a little bit more about that idea of your process with doing the mixed media?
Yeah, I would love to. I love talking about the process. So I have used acrylic paint independently for quite some time, about 15 years. When I was doing my undergraduate degree, I made a decision. I knew I wanted to work with mixed media, but mixed media, so combining, say, like receipts into your oil painting, you know, it's more time consuming. The oil stains the paper. You know, paper is very fragile. You could stain it really easy, so it's kind of precarious to work with. So I switched to acrylic to work with mixed media, and I still am working that way. But acrylic paint, you know, it has its challenges. I have to do a lot of work to the paint. A lot of people think that you could use acrylic paint just out of the tubes, but I highly suggest otherwise. There's just, you know, you have to be very mindful of the way it moves. You know, sometimes there's air bubbles. But the great thing about using acrylic paint is there's different lines of the paint that are all compatible with each other, and I use a particular brand called Golden Artist Colors. So for example, they have a paint line that's like pourable, it's like a fluid paint, and they have a line that's heavy body, meaning it's more of a thick consistency, and they have adhesives that we call like acrylic gel or a polymer gel, and they're all compatible with each other. So you could mix and control the paint itself. So if you look at a lot of the paintings, you may realize that there's some shapes that are very matte, and there's some shapes that are more shiny. And I am able to really control the finished kind of look of the painted color through my use of acrylic paint. But more importantly, for my mixed media practice, the way that I adhere the paper into the painting is the acrylic gel. So it's underneath it, and I very kind of carefully need to control that adhesive so it doesn't get on the surface of the paper. So I have developed this kind of unique way to mount the paper. It's a time-consuming, kind of tricky process involving weights. So I put literal weights on it for quite some time, which is one of the reasons why I paint on wooden panel instead of canvas.
This is a great example here behind us, since everyone can see it easily at home and also here. Again, can you talk about what you just said, then talk about the process of creating this particular work then? Yes,
great. So this particular work, right when I saw the fallen fence, I sketched it really quickly in my sketchbook a couple years ago, and I put a lot of thought into the works that I make. I make tons of studies. Like over the summer, I've made like 15 studies for paintings, but I'm really careful about like which ones I actually am going to paint, right? So for this work, I was able to make this work through the City of Houston and Houston Arts Alliance. So I had this plan in my mind for a long time. And for this particular work, I wanted to express really dry conditions, really, really yellow, very bright, kind of like decay of the grass. So a totally different color palette than I usually use. And then I drew this digitally, and then I made the 18-foot-long graphite drawing. And I actually made that drawing only in a couple of hours, which I was very excited, and I wanted to have a tension between the expressive graphite lines and the solid, kind of constrained, very neat paint. So I drew this huge drawing very, very quickly, and I actually had taped the graphite pencil to the end of a brush, and I did the drawing on the floor. Which was a lot of fun. And then when I got back into my studio, ultimately I had a lot of material to collage into the work. And I knew where I was gonna put each piece because of my digital plans. So I did the painting first, and then I cut the shapes, and then I revisit the painting and kind of go back and forth with painting and adding.
One of the things that we talked about, and this is really as we finish our discussion, I was thinking about, we talked a little bit about what might viewers of your work discover if they slow down, because you're zipping through the landscape and you're coming back and you're recovering those memories and you're writing them and executing them in a really creative, beautiful way. You know, if you invite the viewers here afterwards, like, what do you hope that they might gain? Because they're going to look at something at that particular piece now, this finished work that was this fleeting, fast moment, but what's the advantage of slowing down and looking at something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when people see the work in person, you know, I hope that maybe they would realize, you know, that parts of the work is actually pieces of my drawings. So definitely the variations in the surface. I want to create a rhythm between the different surfaces, so the painted surface and the drawn surface. But then also I love if, you know, they notice the control of the paint, so like the craftsmanship of the shiny and matte shapes. But ultimately, viewers, when viewing artwork, everybody's gonna bring their own personal background, and everybody has their unique interpretation of, you know, why they're looking at the work or what may interest them. But you know, my paintings are very abstract. They're abstract landscape paintings. None of them have blue sky. I've, you know, really focused on pushing, you know, the landscape like as a genre. Like, can I make landscape paintings without sky? Or can I make a landscape painting stand vertically in the gallery so you view it from all sides? But viewers can always just look at the title of my work just for insight of what I'm thinking about, whether it's horses or ranch fences or grass.
One thing, when we were talking about your work and what you were hoping they might take away, we both realized, because I'm a photographer and a lot of my work has been about, you know, finding beauty in the ordinary, and that was something you said, and I'm like, wait, that's what I enjoy. It's all, and I thought you mentioned something about that you hope that people share what you have noticed as like noticing that beauty in the ordinary places and paying attention to everyday routine.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, making art, you can, like with my art, I express my life, my surroundings, the places that I live, the things that I see in my daily life. And, you know, art doesn't have to be a grand still life, you know, something that's just so, we say, beautiful. It could be really anything. You could, you know, think about your surroundings at any time, and, you know, even think about the textures that are around you. I have framed works on papers. There's 3 works on paper in here that are in the small frames, and actually I've taken graphite rubbings of like cement to kind of tie back into the road, and those are abstractions of the freeway, so that, you know, you can find interesting things and, you know, textures and colors all around you at any time. Inspiration is everywhere.
I like that. Inspiration is everywhere, or anywhere.
Yeah.
And everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. I really am so grateful for you sharing your work and your process with us. I really want to again thank the City of Houston and Houston Arts Alliance for supporting both To the Horizon and MUSED Houston Live. I want to thank our audience today for being here and taking time to be here. It really is, we're grateful. And thank you for joining us today on MUSED Houston Live.
Thanks. Thank you.